Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and welcome back. We've been away for a week, so we've got some exciting things to share throughout the session. But what we'll do is we'll just go back and do the homework from 2 weeks ago, and some people will share about their viewpoint of Isaiah 53 and how that fits in with Yeshua being the suffering servant and how we can relate that to a Jewish person. And then Marie and I will share some exciting things that we came across, walked away with from the Chazon conference in Colombia. So I'll briefly introduce again the concept of Isaiah 53 and the suffering servant. Up until Rashi's time, almost all of the sages in Judaism agreed that Isaiah 53 referred to the Messiah, who was the suffering servant. After Rashi's time, he managed to change the thinking of a nation to the point that everybody thought that Isaiah 53 was about the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, and not about an individual person. Initially, he had some disagreements, and people didn't agree with him initially, but somehow that thinking managed to pervade through to current thinking. But I've got a book here called The Messiah Texts, Jewish Legends of 3,000 Years. And there's a bit taken from the Midrash Conan, which I'll just read to you just as an introductory to this whole topic. The fifth house in the heavenly paradise is built on onyx and jasper stones, and inlaid stones and silver and gold and good pure gold. And around it are rivers of balsam, and before its doors flows the river Gihon. And it has a canopy of trees of incense and good scent. And in it are beds of gold and silver and embroidered garments. And there sit Messiah ben David and Elijah and Messiah ben Ephraim. And interesting, they've got two Messiahs here. So remember, there's also, Judaism has the concept, or had the concept of, there are two Messiahs, the suffering servant and the conquering king. And there is a canopy of incense trees, as in the sanctuary which Moses made in the desert. And all its vessels and pillars are of silver, and its covering is gold. Its seat is purple, and it is the Messiah ben David who loves Jerusalem. Elijah of blessed memory takes hold of his head, places it on his lap, and holds it, and says to him, "Endure the suffering and the sentence of your master, who makes you suffer because of the sin of Israel." And thus it is written, "He was wounded because of our transgressions, he was crushed because of our iniquities." Isaiah 53:5. Until the time when the end comes. And every Monday and Thursday and every Shabbat and every holiday, the fathers of the world, that is, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses and Aaron, David and Solomon, and the prophets and the pious ones come and visit him, weeping with him. And he weeps with them. And they give him thanks, and they say to him, "Endure the sentence of your master, for the end is near to come, and the chains which are on your neck will be broken, and you will go out into freedom." And even Korah and his company entreated him every Wednesday, and say to him, "How long until the miraculous end? When will you bring us back to life and bring us up again from the depths of the earth?" And he says to them, "Go and ask the Father of the world." And they are ashamed and return to their place. So this is Judaism back around Yeshua's time and even a little bit further. This is how they saw Messiah. Isn't that a beautiful description of Yeshua, of the things that he's gone through and still going through? Because he still weeps for Jerusalem now. Right now, he's interceding for them, for Jerusalem, and for us, and for the Jewish people. So it's quite powerful. So who would like to share first then their version of Isaiah 53 and how to reach out to a Jewish person with that? Or even just what you think. It doesn't have to be a strategy, just your thoughts of it.
I've just got 6 points and I've just used some of the arguments that the Jewish people use to present Israel as the suffering servants, and I've just given my rebuttal to them, a counter-argument. Point 1, many Jews today believe that the servant spoken of in Isaiah 52:13 and 53:11 is referring to the nation of Israel. They argue that the book of Isaiah often describes the nation of Israel as God's servant, and there is no reason that the servant in Isaiah 53 would suddenly switch to someone other than the Jewish people, which is a fair enough argument, and I can understand that. It is true that Israel is referred to as God's servant many times in the book of Isaiah. For example, in Isaiah 41 and 44 and 49, Israel is described as my servant. However, Israel is just one of the servants mentioned in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 20, the prophet Isaiah himself is called my servant. In Isaiah 22:20, Eliakim is called my servant. In Isaiah 37:35, King David is called my servant. And in Isaiah 45:1, even King Cyrus is called God's anointed. So to say that Israel is the only servant in the book of Isaiah is misleading. There is clearly more than one servant in the book. And then read carefully, and there is a subtle shift starting from Isaiah 52:13, where it says, "See how my servant will succeed. He will be raised up, exalted, highly honored." The text changes from a national perspective to a single person, which is what you wrote. And classical Jewish writings, which is the source and authority of Jewish law and theology, almost absolutely attribute Isaiah 52:13 to 53:12 to the Messiah as a single person and not to the people of Israel. And then I just mentioned Targum Jonathan that I didn't want to regurgitate what you've written. So point 2, the servant in Isaiah 53 is described as righteous. Can we really say that Israel is righteous? Well, the prophet Isaiah opens up chapter 1 describing Israel as rebellious, sinful, a harlot, descendants of evildoers, immoral children who have turned their backs on God and abandoned him. And that's just chapter 1. According to the Torah, if the nation of Israel as a whole was righteous, they would be blessed and not cursed. They would be exalted and not put down. They would be the head and not the tail. Their role was to be a light to the nations, but not to suffer for the nations. So the Torah tells us that Israel has suffered and is punished because of their many sins, not because of their righteousness. And then I even said that the Musaf prayer added in Yom Kippur talks about the Messiah and his transgressions, and a large part of this prayer is taken out of Isaiah 53. And so from this we can prove that up to the 7th century, the Jews believed Isaiah 53 was prophesying about the Messiah. Point 3, the figure in Isaiah 53 is a guilt offering that atones for the sins of the people and makes many righteous. The Hebrew word here in verse 10 is asham, and the asham offering made atonement for the worshippers that led to restoration and forgiveness, so that the worshipper's relationship could be restored to the Lord. As with other offerings, the innocent animal had to be pure and perfect without spot or blemish. I'm not aware of anywhere in the Tanakh that describes the nation of Israel as an asham offering for the sins of other nations. It is almost impossible to describe the Jewish people as an innocent offering, free of spots and blemishes. In fact, Isaiah condemned the empty ritualism of this day, the idolatry into which many of the kings and people had fallen into, the alliances made with other kingdoms rather than trusting in God. He saw the coming Babylonian activity of Judah, and because of their departure from the Lord, Judah would not have been exiled if they were innocent and blemish-free. And then I just quoted some more rabbinic stuff to quote that. Point 4, Isaiah 53:7 says that although the servant is mistreated, he is submissive and did not open his mouth and was silent before his shearers. The servant suffers silently and willingly and without objection. Can we really say that Israel has suffered quietly and willingly? Brave Jewish men and women have always fought in resistance movements against oppressors. For example, the Maccabean revolt against the Greek king Antiochus, the siege of Masada against the Roman Empire, and more recently the underground movements against Hitler. None of these resistant movements were very quiet or willing. However, in Midrash Pesachah, it states, "The Holy One brought forth the soul of the Messiah and said to him, 'Art thou willing to redeem my sons?' He replied, 'I am.' God replied, 'If so, thou must take upon thyself chastisements in order to wipe away their iniquity. As it is written, surely our sickness he hath carried.' The Messiah answered, 'I will take upon me gladly.'" So he's back in the Midrash. It just states that the Messiah was willing to take it on. Point 5. In the opening verse, "Who has believed our report?" the Jews believe the world leaders are speaking, and that these verses describe how world leaders will be shocked at the incredible news of Israel's salvation. They base this understanding on the previous chapter in Isaiah 52:15, at the end of 52, where it says, "So now he will startle many nations, and because of him kings will be speechless. For they will see what they have not been told, and they will ponder things they have never heard." Okay. To me, there are many inconsistencies with this argument. Firstly, Gentile kings never speak prophetically as a group anywhere in Isaiah or anywhere else in the Bible that I know of. Throughout the book of Isaiah, it is always Isaiah himself speaking or God speaking through Isaiah. It doesn't make logical sense that Isaiah would all of a sudden insert Gentile kings to speak God's salvation to the Jews and healing to the nations. Isaiah 52:15 says that the kings were speechless. So how can they be speaking? They are either speechless or speaking, but not usually both at the same time. And the text says that they were speechless. And the last point, lastly, modern day Jews believe that in Isaiah 53, world leaders will admit that Israel's suffering actually brought healing to the nations. History tells us that when Israel suffered at the hands of the nations, it did not bring healing to the nations. In fact, it brought them destruction. God used the nations to punish Israel for their disobedience, but when they overdid the punishment, it says that God would wipe out the nations that smote Israel. So Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, Greece were all crushed as they overdid the punishment. So persecution of the Jews did not bring healing to the nations. It only brought them destruction. So nowhere in the Torah does it teach that Israel, by its suffering, would redeem the nations. And it is the Messiah, the righteous servant, who brings healing to the nations. So, in conclusion, ancient writings from a wide variety of sources, such as Targum, Jonathan, Babylonian Talmud, Maimonides, Zohar, and even the current Jewish prayer for Yom Kippur, all attribute Isaiah 53 to the suffering Messiah as a single person, and not to the people of Israel. I think the words of Rabbi Sayada ibn Danan of Granada in the 16th century summarize this debate very well. Concerning Isaiah 53, he said, "One of these, Rabbi Joseph ben Caspi, was led so far as to say that those who expounded it of the Messiah, who is shortly to be revealed, gave occasion to the heretics to interpret it of Jesus. May God, however, forgive him for not having spoken the truth. Our rabbis, the doctors of the Talmud, deliver their opinions by the power of prophecy, possessing a tradition concerning the principles of interpretation, and it alludes covertly to the King Messiah." This rabbi is saying that one reason the other rabbis was against interpreting the passage to speak of the Messiah is because the passage was being applied to Yeshua. It appears that attempts to interpret the passage to apply to Israel were driven more by anti-Yeshua motives rather than sound principles of interpretation. So he inserted that the dominant view of Isaiah 53 of the Talmudic period was that it referred to the suffering of King Messiah. Sorry, it took so long.
In my research, I sort of where I was coming from was sort of thinking the translations that we get in English aren't necessarily all that correct, and we don't get the correct understanding. So all I'm going to do is just give you some alternative understandings. And the only ones I could get from Isaiah, from this fellow, was 53 verses 4 to 11. And these are written by, or translated by, a bloke named Uriel ben Mordecai, who lives in Jerusalem, and he trusts in Yeshua as his Redeemer. So he's a Jew, but he follows a lot of the traditions of the Judaism, but at the same time he trusts Yeshua, or trusts in the redemption that Yeshua offered. Anyway, the translation differences, it will give you just a different slant on things. And this is starting with verse 4. He says, undeniably, he shouldered our abuses, our shameful acts. As he tolerated them, we deemed him contaminated, defeated by God, and utterly humiliated. And he was dishonoured on account of our misconduct, downtrodden for our improprieties. Moral values with which we were comfortable were thrust upon him, and yet in the company of his people, Hashem's people, shall we be restored to health. All of us, like a flock, have erred. There's no more to that verse. 7, I don't have anything on. By means of arrest and through legal means he was seized, and who from his generation would dare speak up? After exile was levied against him, whenever an unlawful act was committed from my people, it was trauma for them. For which deeds he had not engaged in acts of violence, nor had deception proceeded out from his mouth. And Hashem noted with interest him being crushed, and how he is being violated. If you lay guilt, his soul will see offspring, days will be greatly expanded, and Hashem will cause contentment to flourish in his hand. From his mercy he will see light, and he will be satisfied with his knowledge. He, my servant, indicated before multitudes, the one who was right, the one who was to bear up under wicked actions. So that's just gives you a slightly different understanding from that passage. It's interesting when I did some research, but it was Paul actually quoted lots from Isaiah, heaps and heaps, but I didn't record any of it. I didn't have as much time as Jenny. Obviously, I'll spend as much time. But even 1 Peter 1:21 and 22 and 25, there's some quotes from Isaiah 53. And 21, it says, Messiah left behind for us an example so we might follow in his steps. And in 22, which is a quotation from Isaiah 53:9, for which deeds he had not engaged in acts of violence, nor had deception proceeded out from his mouth, which you might find is different in all the translations that you have. And in 25 it says, indeed, all of us like a flock have erred, but now at this moment have returned to the shepherd, Hashem, the guardian of our souls. But that's not a quote, it's just the first part of it's a quotation from Isaiah. I do have other points, but I don't think I'll put those to you. Okay.
Yeah, what we might do is actually get the full text from you guys if you're happy to share it with everybody, and we'll put that online as well. So yeah, all good. Excellent. Thank you. So that for those watching online, that's just an example of the excellent scholarship we have in this Beit Midrash, and we look forward to hearing much more from everybody. And even for those watching online, if you want to send something in, then please do, and we'll share it with everybody. Right. Well, now we'll change pace a little bit, and we just want to share a bit about the Chazon conference in Colombia. I think it's important because we both came back with much bigger, renewed With Chazon, with vision. So I'll just give you a brief numbers and people overview, and then I'll talk about a couple of teaching little points, and then Marie will share as well afterwards. So we had keynote speakers. We had Rabbi Shapira, who's, in case you don't know, laser pen. This person here, Rabbi Shapira. We had Rabbi Bernstein, this gentleman over here, or Rubino, he's actually called Rubino. I think Rubino is it? Okay. We had Pastor Rubio, who's down here, who is the pastor of the Kehilat Yovel in Bogota, Colombia. They have a few other Kehilas as well in Florida and that. They're planting one that we actually committed to pray for in another part of Colombia. So they are expanding. Yeah, they've been going for 20 years. I can't praise this gentleman more highly. Him and his wife and his family and his whole Kahila. They're just people of integrity, of honor, of great influence, and we'll see the influence shortly. The other main speaker was Rabino Goldschmidt, who's this gentleman up here. He's the chief Orthodox rabbi of Colombia, who spoke last year, and they invited the chief Orthodox rabbi from Guatemala this year to be the keynote speaker. And the chief rabbi of Colombia said, "But can I come too, please?" He really wanted to come along. Unfortunately, the chief rabbi of Guatemala couldn't come. The day that he was planning to take off, the volcano erupted in Guatemala, and he was grounded at the airport. He was at the airport phoning in saying, "Please pray for me that I can get there," but unfortunately he couldn't make it. Consequently, though, the rabbi from Colombia had a great encouraging message for us Gentiles grafted into Israel. There were 13 other speakers. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but you might recognize a face or two there. Where's my face? Up there. Just that teeny weeny little one. They all shared various things relating to vision based on what they believed the Lord had given them. It was quite a varied number of messages, but there was a common theme through most of them, which is really good to see. And it wasn't just vision, but there was like the Ruach HaKodesh and unity and things like that. And I think Marie's going to just give some key words later on that sort of flowed through all of those messages that really sums everything up. Basically, to summarize, the vision that Marie and I walked away with from this conference was that Messianic Judaism is much bigger than what we originally walked into the conference with. In fact, it's much bigger than what we're doing here at Beit Midrash. And I'm sure we all know that. But sometimes you can get so focused in on what we're doing here that you forget the bigger picture. And we've been exposed to the bigger picture, which is even bigger than what we thought. So hopefully we can bring that across to you later on. But the whole thing is, I want to preface that the fact that it's bigger than us here is the fact that it needs us to fulfill that picture, that vision. Without us doing the things that we need to do, we're not going to see this vision of Messianic Judaism fulfilled. And Marie will talk about some strategies at the end there. And we also came away with a bigger vision for Australia in terms of Messianic Judaism and the things that we're going to be doing. So I'll touch on a couple of the teachings from the two Messianic pastors, or rabbis, I should say. And are you going to include anything from Pastor Rubio? No, just the Rabbi Goldschmidt. Okay. So there were three main points. Rabbi Shapira had a pre-conference meeting of the yeshiva students, and there was three really good, important points that he came away with. I'll share only one because his whole teaching went for 3.5 hours. Now, you've got to take into account there was a translator, so it's probably more like 2 hours. But still, it's a lot of information that he, and that was just the afternoon. He already had a morning session, which Marie and I missed out on because we'd have landed in the country. We wanted to freshen up a bit, so we didn't get there till lunchtime. So I'll only share one of those 3 points this afternoon. So the point was, when the children of Israel were in Egypt, even though they were a kahal, an assembly, or a what's the other word for it? An assembly. They weren't a true assembly. They because the Bible says, or the scriptures say, that they were called a kohetz ruach, and that means they were short of breath, and like asthma. It's a term for asthma, actually, so they actually didn't have the Spirit in them at the time. They were scattered. They were an assembly, but they were not united. It was not until Nisan 14 when after that they were classed as a Kahal Israel. So they received a unified revelation of God, from God, about what was going to happen. And they suddenly became unified, and they became Kahal Israel. Before they were just a Kahal. Then they became Kahal Israel. And now they had a surplus of the Ruach, and they became a true community. Then, later on in Numbers, we read that they're called Kahal Adat Israel. And that means they actually had a testimony as well. So they started from a group of people that were just a group with no common vision to a common vision, which they put into action. And then God worked for them and through them. And then they became a group of people united with a united testimony. They had a testimony as a community, and that was the strength that they had. And basically what Rabbi Shapiro was saying, one of the points was, we need to have a testimony as a community. It's good to have individual testimonies, but we need to have a community testimony that draws us together, united vision, putting that vision into place, and then a testimony that comes out of that. So that was the first day of the pre-conference. For the conference, Rabbi Shapiro spoke about the 2 towers, the Tower of Babel and the Tower of David. And he said each tower was made up of bricks. The original tower had the right vision, it had unity, but it had the wrong execution. It was an execution against God, a unity against God, the Tower of Babel. And that's obviously why God destroyed it. He says, we are to build the Tower of David, which is Messiah. So I haven't got all the scriptures to back all this up. I'm just trying to give you a quick summary of what he said. And we are the bricks that form that tower, each one of us individually. Chazon starts with understanding of each other, which then leads to unity. So as we understand how we fit into that tower, how we build that tower, then that becomes unity to build that. Our flavour, which may be different, our flavour may be different around the world or even within our communities, but around the world our flavour is different. Messianic Judaism in Colombia is going to be totally different. We're going to see some videos and we're going to go, oh, it'd be great to have that here, but you know what, this is Australia. We don't worship the same way as the Hispanics do. We can introduce some of that flavour. The whole thing is we have the spirit, the same spirit, a unity between Colombia and here, between India and here, between Europe and here. The same Torah, the same spirit. He said Chazon is a root word for a weather forecaster in Hebrew. So Chazon is foretelling what is going to come tomorrow or the next day or a little bit further down the track. It's active and it's not passive. And that was the common thread through many of the messages, that Chazon is active. It's not something we just have and then, well, we'll see what happens. We actually have to put it to action. Actually, we're going to run way over time. Doesn't matter. 2:30 is when we're supposed to stop, grab coffee, and then people from the Didache study should join us. So we'll see how we go, if anybody comes. Anybody else? Rabbi Bernstein taught that vision is something that happens. It's not static. Sorry? he says that God allows us to have a change in perspective when he gives us his vision. So he used two examples. One example was when Yeshua was on the Mount of Transfiguration. He stepped out of time and space, and the disciples saw that. They were allowed to have a vision that was bigger than where they were. It was a vision of the future and the beginning, just like Jacob's ladder. Joseph saw the middle of it. He said it went down to the ground and up to heaven, but he was sitting in the middle. He saw that whole vision. So that was the whole concept of Chazon, taking us out of where we were and seeing the bigger picture. So as I said, we've walked away from that with a bigger perspective of Messianic Judaism. There were so many good and encouraging messages from all the speakers, and unfortunately we can't share them all. But as I said, they all had a common theme, or very common themes. And what I want to do now is hand over to Marie to actually talk about some of those themes in the one-words, phrases. Cool. And then we'll have a look at some slides. We'll talk to the slides a little bit, and then we'll share a bit more at the end.
Can I stand?
Yeah.
Okay, shalom everyone online. Shabbat shalom. I'm going to share a little bit of what took place in Colombia in the Chazon Vision Conference. For me, I chose words that would actually capitulate and express what rose up in my spirit. So this is the essence and direction of Chazon for me. Relationship, leadership, respect, capacity, honoring, representation, discipleship, love. They're single words, but there's so much in those words. Yeah. And I just want to express the enormity of scale. It is so much bigger than my little narrow-minded mind could ever have imagined, but it's not impossible. Presence and direction of Yeshua by his Spirit. Godly direction has its own motion and description. The functioning body of Mashiach, that was something that really stood out for me. Not just to have a vision, but to put it into living action. The Spirit of Mashiach through prophecy, through love, through unity, and through joy. Celebrating each other's success, no matter how big or small. Expression of national identity with the same, as Ralph mentioned, the same Spirit of Mashiach. Now that's something that really spoke volumes to me because of all the nations that were represented. And oftentimes the rabbis would say, you know, we've been everywhere to these nations and it looks different at times, but the Spirit is the same. And that just really welled up inside of me. And my final word that I've got here is prayer. And it's personal prayer, obviously, but it's prayer and it's intercession. And I was really challenged, motivated, and directed in that way. So, the rabbi of Colombia, the chief Orthodox rabbi, Rabbi Alfredo Goldschmidt, spoke really well, a real statesman, I would say. And he said three major points. I'm not going to expand on them. I'm giving them to you as headings. They are to live in the present reality of your vision, live in it. Don't just see it, but live it. Have a plan and a direction. And then have the capacity to make the dream into truth. Is that all you want me to share for now? Yeah, because after that I've got Chazon for Australia. So I know that that really wasn't fleshed out. So ask me later if you need that to be fleshed out.
Don't go away there.
No.
So something else that happened on the first day of the conference, Rabbi Shapira called the leaders from fellowships together for a lunch, and Marie and I were blessed to be a part of that. There was all those people there you see. So about 13, and there was probably about 2 or 3 more that weren't involved.
They weren't present at the
Yeah.
conference as well.
No, they were at the conference, but they weren't speakers,
Ah.
so they weren't on that list.
Yeah.
And he's basically, so this is 15 couples from about 35 to 40 ministry leaders around the world that are part of the yeshiva. He's come to recognize that if a bus hit him tomorrow, this could all fall over because it all hinges on him at the moment. So God has actually convicted him. The Holy Spirit was talking to him about stepping back from things a little bit and allowing the leaders to start relating to one another, to start communicating, supporting one another, whatever's required to keep this thing going, because this vision is much bigger than him. He can't sustain it physically. He's going all over the world. He's just exhausted. But not only that, if something happened to him and he's the only one that's pushing it, then it would all fall down. So, yeah, Marie and I were blessed to be a part of that. So there was no specific direction or guidance told to any of us, but as we were sitting there, things were coming to us of how we should implement this, and we'll talk about that shortly. Right, so we'll go through some of the shots now, some of the videos and clips that we've taken, and we'll just talk to that. This is the Torah service on the Shabbat morning, and this is them just bringing the Torah out and just show you some of the joy there.
So this is in Kehila Yovel. That's the congregation there. This is in Kehila Yovel. That's their building.
I'll stop there. I think you got the spirit of what's happening.
It is awesome. Yeah.
Okay. There, this was on the first day as well, the pre-conference. Each of the leaders from the different nations that were there were called to come out and pray for their nation for a minute. So everybody had an opportunity to pray for their nation, and everybody else would pray with them. So that's just me. But yeah. Did you want to share about?
So as Rabbi introduced everyone to come out and to pray for their nation, my ears pricked to hear what he would say for Australia, and he said that for the great revival that is yet to come to Australia. And we know that that revival is in the Word and the Spirit of Messiah. So I'm like, yes.
Because, I mean, Australia is way behind in terms of Messianic Judaism. Australia is way behind in terms of Messianic Judaism when you compare what's happening around the world. And some of these people have got congregations of 100 to 500 people. The leaders that weren't there from Indonesia, from Sri Lanka, from Singapore, they have 500 people in their fellowships. You know, maybe not all in one group, but they're scattered throughout the nation where they are, and they oversee those people. So in Australia, we're this little, but we know it's going to grow.
We know God has a plan. Yeah.
So this is the first day of the conference. Just
opening ceremony.
The opening ceremony, basically.
This is only a snippet of the opening ceremony, but we chose this because it just shows how overwhelmed and how purposeful.
Look, there's Australia.
How purposeful they were of the nations that came to Colombia. There's a little Aussie flag there.
And then this is the dancing that happened afterwards. I mean, they didn't need much encouragement to come up and, you know.
So the men on the left doing their circle of dance, the women on the right.
So this is where we're going to be employing you, Kim, to teach you some of these things.
Yeah.
Right, excellent.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Can you see the circle of the men? Look, the speed in which that took place. Oh,
That was slow.
oh yeah, that really built momentum. Okay.
So that's just a shot of, that's half the hall. So you can imagine that again to the other side, because we were roughly in the middle of the hall. Second row back, but in the middle. So it was quite a big, it was 450 delegates that we managed to fit in there. That's just the worship team again. And there was no idolizing the worship team as in, wow, these guys are great. The clapping and the cheering and all that was for God. It wasn't for, hey, you guys did such a great job. It was really, they were part of the Spirit. So this is some delegates that came along. Pastor Rubio is a man of extreme influence. This is the ambassador for Israel in Colombia on the left-hand side. I can't remember his name now.
Apologies for that.
Yeah, apologies. He came and addressed us, and he was just so encouraging for us as Gentiles, what we're doing, being grafted into the nation of Israel, supporting Israel, the Jewish people. Whenever there was a protest by the Palestinians in Colombia against the Jews, the first people that would be there was Pastor Rubio, and his Messianic believers would be there supporting Israel at the same time. So they would be always there in support of the Jewish people.
Not in the sense of conflict, but in the sense of presence and prayer.
Yeah. On the right-hand side, we've got 6 councillors in the Bogota Council who are either Christian, Jewish, or Messianic believers. And that document that the second guy along there is holding, I can't remember all the points. They had 7 points where they basically said they're going to try and run their council, their country, or whatever they can, their shire, based on Yeshua and the Messiah and the guidelines of Torah and that. So they committed to running the council in a godly way. And that was just incredible to see that.
Considering the corruption that there is in government in those places of the world,
So we have Rabbi Shapiro and Pastor Rubio there enjoying the conference. And there we have Marie and I with Pastor Rubio and his wife Viviana. She did all the organising for this conference. She organised for us to be picked up from the airport all the way back to being dropped off at the airport.
So much in between.
And this was one of the most professionally run conferences that I've been to, both from a Christian world, from previous Christian events to even professional business type events. This was just flawless. This
it was amazing.
On the left, we have Pastor Matt, who he calls himself the kosher pastor. Doesn't class himself as a Messianic believer, but he is. But he is a kosher pastor, pastors the Christian church, but he wears his kippah and his tzitzits into, all the time, but he brings Messianic Judaism into the Christian environment, into Christendom.
Yeah, which was something vital for us because that is part of the calling that we have.
His encouragement was, if we cut ourselves off from Christendom, who's going to tell them the good news that we know? We need to stay in communication with them.
Yeah. And on the right-hand side there, you see that shark. That's part of the children's ministry that they are building in part of the yeshiva to reach children and to have...
His name is Chomp, so he uses that for children's ministry. And he does interviews with people with Chomp, and it's a good way to break down barriers, Pastor Manny and his wife, I can't remember her name, unfortunately.
So apologies there, from the Dominican Republic.
There was a kindred spirit there with this man. I won't show you how he preached because it was very Pentecostal.
Well, it was very fiery and emotional.
But very fiery, very emotional.
Yeah.
He's actually a professional trombone player.
can I just say here that this was the very first time in Rabbi Shapiro's life that he ever worshipped to a Christian song, How Great Thou Art, or that he was, allowing himself in that presence. So that speaks volume of the spirit of Mashiach that was there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that when he was moved by the Spirit, which was a lot of the time during the when he wasn't teaching, what welled up, how we have a well inside of us and the Spirit the Ruach then comes out. He had no words in English and he prayed in Hebrew. And sometimes he just prayed prayers out of the prayers. I thought it was elements that came out that seemed familiar to me. Just the names of God and his attributes would just flow out like a river. But it was in Hebrew. So for him to be exposed to this, it just is testament to the spirit of Messiah that was there.
Yeah. So as a result of the teaching that I did on the first day of the conference, so that was Sunday night, I thought I was going to get to share with the Messianic, with the non-believers, but it was actually put forward today. And I had to cut my message short as well because we were running out of time. So it was a little bit chippy-choppy, but Pastor Manny caught the spirit of what I was teaching, and as a result, they've invited us to come to Dominican Republic.
So yeah,
how we're going to get there and when, I don't know.
That's God's hand.
So,
but kindred spirit. Though.
Yeah, but we will keep in touch for sure. He was the one that organised 3,500 people to march for Jerusalem on the 70th anniversary in the Dominican Republic. Many of the Christian churches and everybody else pulled out, and he was able to bring those people back together and organise that march.
With a lot of opposition,
Yeah.
but...
With a lot of opposition, for sure. Tim from Texas, Yoel, he'll call you Yoel. Howdy, Yoel. He unfortunately didn't get a chance to speak. He was one of the keynotes or one of the guest speakers. He had a bit of a high blood pressure situation on the day he was meant to speak. He had to sleep, missed out his turn. The next day we ran out of time, so he actually didn't get a chance to share his message, which he shared with us that night.
It was amazing.
It was really good. It was quite different to the other messages, yet it was still a common theme. Anyway, so he was feeling quite down on himself, and then he shared with us this. He shared that, is that someone here? Yeah.
Hello, welcome.
Sorry.
Welcome.
We are running a bit late. Are you here for the Didache case study? Sorry, we're running a little bit late. So,
but you're welcome.
No, come on in.
Stay.
Can you organise a seat, please, Ryan? Thanks. So Tim was outside of the conference in the lounge area where he was feeling a little bit sorry for himself. These 5 Chabad Hasidic Jews, okay, they're not Messianic believers, they're Hasidic Jews, were outside at the same time. He was introduced to them through an interpreter because they can't speak English and he couldn't speak Spanish. One of them said to him, "We need to learn from you." And then he turned around and said, no, we need to learn from you. So they ended up exchanging email addresses, and so they're going to keep in communication and study the Word of God together. Chabad, Hasidic Jews and Messianic believers. Just awesome bridge building. So I think missing out on him sharing probably was made up by the fact that he's built this bridge with these guys. They were there the whole conference.
Yeah, from an experience, it's not easy to do. It's not.
No. Yeah.
Yes.
Dan Kalik and Devorah Kalik from Israel. These are the guys from Bless Israel Network that we are communicating with and connecting with, that we're doing some support with, and they're putting us in touch with local Messianic believers that we can support, like the Holocaust survivors that we've started financially supporting.
Yeah, so just a picture to a face there.
Yep, Rabbi Bernstein.
A very candid photo of Rabbi Bernstein, but nevertheless.
We're not used to these things, and it was only the last day that we thought, we've got to take photos of people, and Rabbi Bernstein was gone already, so here we are running around with everybody, click, click, click.
Not good at that.
Not very good. So there's...
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, you're going.
I can't remember her name now.
Petronella from Zimbabwe.
A huge ministry with children.
Yeah.
Over 1,000 children that they Although they are a very poverty-stricken nation, one thing that they do is they educate their children. And when they say children, it's right up to 18 years of age. So she and her sister have a very successful ministry in education. But what they also have introduced to that now is Rabbi Shapira's teaching on a Saturday. And so it's right from the little ones to the 18-year-olds. So, yeah, that's something that's developing as well. And on the right-hand side, I have two girls, one from Hawaii and the other, they're two students. The one that is standing joined the yeshiva, as did I. We both passed our interview. So I just...
It's not that she's standing, she's just a bit taller than everybody else.
Oops! Oops! Valid.
So on the very day that this rainbow was happening over Colombia, the eruption was happening over Guatemala, and it was preventing the chief Orthodox rabbi from coming to the conference.
Yeah.
So that was disappointing. What we do in the break, we might show you the video of this Venezuelan couple.
It's only a 3-minute one, and I do encourage everyone to come back and listen to what is said here, because it's in relation to the flag and the curse that's on the nation of Venezuela due to the dictator.
So this couple here, we'll probably hear a little bit in the testimony, but they're from Venezuela. They had to walk tracks to the border. She was allowed to cross. He was stopped at the border for a period of time. Miraculously, he was allowed to cross as well.
We were all praying.
And then they hopped on a bus and joined us at the conference. They basically put their lives on the line to come and join us at that conference.
Yeah.
That's one couple that I want to talk about us supporting as well, because they minister to the children in Venezuela that don't get medications. A lot of them are on death's door, and their parents are happy to have someone else adopt them, get them out of the country, because they know that in that country the children
will die.
That's how bad it is in Venezuela at the moment. Just some men praying. The pastor from Italy, so he's the head of the yeshiva in Italy. He couldn't speak English, but guess what? He speaks German, so we were able to communicate a little bit in German.
Yeah, a network that he also wanted Australia to network with Rome, so that's something that will be there, as did the one from Texas. So that's
right. The guy from Texas, Yoel, he also invited us to come and minister there. So we'll have to do the Texas Dominican Republic trip.
Yeah, but this man's a man of influence.
That's just me sharing my message. Then the pastor from the fellowship in India, he doesn't own a suit or a coat or anything like that, and Rabbi told him to dress up for the occasion. So we went out at lunchtime and we've got a coat for him. So he was blessed.
Yeah.
Rabbi Shapira presenting an old scroll from Isaiah, not 53, right? But it predates the Holocaust. It was a fragment of something that was rescued. I can't remember exactly. I have to look at the video again what it was. But it was an apology for the previous year when someone stood up and asked the chief Orthodox rabbi of Colombia, he asked the question, or that person asked the question, so when are you going to recognize Yeshua as the Messiah? Which is not the sort of thing to build a bridge, okay?
Yeah. And I mean, I understand and I say this with the right attitude, I believe. I understand the ignorance of Christendom. They would say, oh, come on, Jews, come and recognize Yeshua or Jesus as Messiah. But that's not how you win anyone over. Yeah. And it grieved Rabbi Shapira so much that for an entire year he sought the leadership, the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the Ruach, and this is what was the outcome. So he didn't necessarily say, I'm really sorry for that, but he gave this in the spirit of an apology. It was really very powerful.
And that rabbi was so encouraging of what we are doing. When I say we, the Messianic Jews that are in Colombia doing and working with the Jewish people.
Such wisdom, such guidance.
He had so much encouragement. He basically said, keep going, He said, we can put our little differences aside and we can keep working towards a common goal, and that is to see Messiah come. whether
That's
it's the first time or the second time. We're both looking for Messiah to come.
That's just a picture to show you the beauty of Colombia. That was the Spanish footprint, I would say. Yeah.
The Kosher Cafe, that's
Yeah.
where we've got the coffee from. We're going to have in the break. So we're going to share some kosher coffee from Colombia.
Yeah,
And that's
there
it.
we
So
go.
you now
Yeah,
you wanted to share your... Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this won't take long to share this, but I really felt to write these things down, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the study. That's okay. So Chazon, vision for Australia. I just wanted to say that we as Australians are the ones who know the desperate need for Messiah and his true representation through the framework of Messianic Judaism. But how do we make this happen? Through our representation in this small Beit Midrash, this small study house. This is the vision and challenge that we've come home with. Number one, the networking of Messianic Judaism in Australia through the existing fellowship that we have in Sydney and in Canberra. I'm not going to expand on this, I'm just giving you headings, yes? Number two, the gathering of all the Australian yeshiva students to create unity and to help one another. And there are not many. There's one in Cairns, there's a few around, Sydney. Number three, in Derech HaMashiach, short to mid-term vision. That's on our website if you haven't had the time to read it, but it's there. We speak of forming a branch of the yeshiva, and there are two expressions of this. One branch of the yeshiva is for us as an entire class or gathering. It's a group expression. So, for example, if we do Hebrew 101, we would do it as a group and not as individual people. That's the first way. And the second way, of course, is through individual entry as individual students, as is Ralph. And
Marie's just joined up.
I've just joined up. Pray for me because I'm going to need it. So Rabbi Shapira himself spoke to the delegates, and he said that he has a vision for Australia, and that vision is to start a yeshiva by 2019. Another vision, number four, another vision and expression that is seeded in Der HaMashiach is to form a kahila. So again, if you go to the website, you will see that it's there. Something that we've known on our hearts and sort of like, okay, well, we'll do the Beit Midrash first and then we'll get to that, which is okay. But being there and speaking with others, we came back acknowledging that this is more real and more urgent than perhaps we put merit to.
So I'll just preface that we already are a kahila in a way. Okay?
We are to a degree.
Yeah, we'll make it more formal. We'll start to introduce prayer service. We'll
Torah service.
We'll start to actually call for memberships and things like that. So it'll become more formal. At the moment, we're just a Beit Midrash with a group of people. But it's like I said before, when we have that revelation of God, we become from Kahal to Kahal Israel. We start to become unified in the vision. Yeah.
So with that in mind. Number 5 is to reach the churches or Christendom with a message of Messianic Judaism. We're not talking about, you guys have got it wrong. It's not that. It's not conversion. It's just, have you ever considered this element that makes us whole? That's what it is. It's a holistic view of.
I really believe that a Messiah will come not just at the fullness of the Gentiles, but at the fullness of the Jews. They both have to happen together. And the only way that's going to happen together is both Gentiles and Jews are working together to the same vision to see Messiah come. And while we've got that bridge of, and I have to say Jesus Christ, because that's the one who has been portrayed wrongly to the Jews, while we've got that wall between us, we will never come to that unified front. When we break down that wall and we show that Yeshua is the Jewish rabbi, the Jewish Messiah, we can start to build that bridge.
Yeah. And then, so number 6, and we're almost finished now, we came away with the understanding of networking with the nations. So the nations that are very real and have communicated with us are places like Asia, because they're our closest neighbour, Sri Lanka, America, Dominican Republic, and Rome. They're the nations that were interested in Australia, networking with them. And number 7 is prayer. And I purposely left this until last, but I am motivated by the importance and the need of this function in our gatherings, both on an individual and intercessory levels, as I mentioned before. Not only to protect the vision, but to live the vision through prayer. And we are imploring all of you to prayerfully consider your place and involvement to make the prayer and those things that we've spoken just now a reality.
Yeah, we're talking big. We're talking big vision.
Very big.
We're a small group. How God's going to do that, I don't know, but we need to
We have to start.
putting that into action.